Okay, everyone. So once again, if you put your novel down, I need you to open it back up. Get it to page 2. When you read with me, you become a better reader. Not only that, but you are definitely going to have to go back and look at passages in the novel. So have it out and ready. Our focus for these pages: how are George and Lenny similar, and how are they different? What is their relationship like? Okay, so I want you to pay attention to those things. I'm going to broadcast the pages on the screen again, and if you don't have a book yet, you can read along with me. We're in your novel. We're on page 2, near the top, at Evening of a Hot Day. Evening of a hot day started the little wind to moving among the leaves. The shade climbed up the hills toward the top. On the sandbanks, the rabbit sat as quietly as little gray sculptured stones. And then from the direction of the state highway came the sound of footsteps on crisp sycamore leaves. The rabbits hurried noiselessly for cover. A stilted heron labored up into the air and pounded down the river. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then 2 men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool. They had walked in a single file down the path, and even in the open, one stayed behind the other. Both were dressed in denim trousers and in denim coats with brass buttons. Both wore black, shapeless hats, and both carried tight blanket rolls slung over their shoulders. The first man was small and quick, dark of face with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. Every part of him was defined: small, strong hands, slender arms, a thin and bony nose. Behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large, pale eyes, with wide, sloping shoulders. And he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. His arms did not swing at his sides, but hung loosely. The first man stopped short in a clearing, and the follower nearly ran him over. He took off his hat and wiped the sweatband with his forefinger and snapped the moisture off. His huge companion dropped his blanket and flung himself down and drank from the surface of the green pool. Drank with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. The small man stepped nervously beside him. "Lenny," he said sharply. "Lenny, for God's sake, don't drink so much." Lenny continued to snort into the pool. The small man leaned over him and shook him by the shoulders. "Lenny, you're going to be sick like you was last night." Lenny dipped his whole head under, hat and all, and then he sat up on the bank and his hat dripped down his back. "That's good," he said. "You drink some, George. You take a good big drink." He smiled happily. George unslung his bindle and dropped it gently on the bank. "I ain't sure it's good water," he said. "It looks kind of scummy." Lenny dabbled his big paws in the water and wiggled his fingers so the water arose in little splashes. Rings widened across the pool to the other side and came back again. Lenny watched them go. "Look, George, look what I done." Okay, everyone, so we're going to take a look at the way that Lenny, Big Lenny, is described early on in these pages. So 3 descriptions. The first one: he walked heavily, dragging his feet a little, the way a bear drags his paws. Second description: his huge companion dropped his blanket and flung himself down and drank from the surface of the green pool. Drank with long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. The third description: Lenny dabbled his big paw in the water and wiggled his fingers so the water arose in little splashes. So my question to you: what do these descriptions have in common? And why might Steinbeck use this language to describe Lenny? Steinbeck's the author. Why does he use the language from here to describe Lenny? Look specifically at the bolded words that I used. I want you to answer in 2 to 3 sentences. Why does he use this language to describe Lenny? Okay, so Steinbeck repeatedly uses animal imagery and figurative language. So we see the way a bear drags his paws, right? Snorting into the water like a horse, okay? The animal descriptions reinforces Lenny's size. Bears and horses are large animals. They also might hint that Lenny has some animalistic traits like innocence, violence, and a drive for survival. So we are going to pick back up on the last paragraph of page 3. George knelt beside the pool. George knelt beside the pool and drank from his hand with quick scoops. "Tastes all right," he admitted. "Don't really seem to be running, though. You never ought to drink water when it ain't running, Lenny, he said hopelessly. You'd drink out of a gutter if you was thirsty. He threw a scoop of water into his face and rubbed it about with his hand, under his chin and around the back of his neck. Then he replaced his hat, pushed himself back from the river, drew up his knees, and embraced them. Lenny, who had been watching, imitated George exactly. He pushed himself back, drew up his knees, embraced them, looked over to George to see whether he had it just right. He pulled his hat down a little more over his eyes, the way George's hat was. George stared morosely, vocab word, at the water. The rims of his eyes were red with sun glare. He said angrily, "We could just as well row clear to the ranch if that bastard bus driver knew what he was talking about. Just a little stretch down the highway," he says. "Just a little stretch. Gosh darn near 4 miles, that's what it was. Didn't want to stop at the ranch gate, that's what. Too gosh darn lazy to pull up. Wonder he isn't too damn good to stop in Soledad at all. Kicks us out and says, 'Just a little stretch down the road.' I bet it was more than 4 miles. Damn hot day." Lenny looked timidly over to George. Over to him. "George?" "Yeah, what you want?" "Where are we going, George?" The little man jerked down the brim of his hat and scowled over at Lenny. "So you forgot that already, did you? I gotta tell you again, do I? Jesus Christ, you are a crazy bastard." "I forgot," said Lenny softly. "I try not to forget. Honest to God, I did, George." Okay, I'll tell you again. I ain't got nothing to do. Might just as well spend all the time telling you things and then you forget them. And I tell you again. "Tried and tried," said Lenny, "but it didn't do no good. I remember about the rabbits, George." "The hell with the rabbits. That's all you ever can remember is them rabbits. Okay, now listen, and this time you got to remember so we don't get in no trouble. You remember sitting in that gutter on Howard Street and watching that blackboard?" Lenny's face broke into a delighted smile. "Why, sure, George, I remember that. But what did we do then?" "I remember some girls come by and say, and you says, the hell what I says. You remember about us going into Murray and Reddy's and then give us work cards and bus tickets?" "Oh, sure, George, I remember that now." His hands went quickly into his side coat pockets. He said gently, "George, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it." He looked down at the ground in despair. "You never had none, you crazy bastard. I got 'em both of 'em here. You think I'd let you carry your own work card?" Lenny grinned with relief. I thought I put it in my side pocket." His hand went into the pocket again. George looked sharply at him. "What'd you take out of that pocket?" "I ain't a thing in my pocket," Lenny said cleverly. "I know there ain't. You got it in your hand. What you got in your hand hiding in it?" "I ain't got nothing, George. Honest." "Come on, give it here." Lenny held his closed hand away from George's direction. "It's only a mouse, George." "A mouse? A live mouse?" Just a dead mouse, George. I didn't kill it, honest. I found it. I found it dead." "Give it here," said George. "Oh, leave me have it, George." "Give it here." Lenny closed hands slowly obeyed. George took the mouse and threw it across the pool to the other side among the brush. What you want with the dead mouse, anyways?" "I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along," said Lenny. "Well, you ain't petting no mice while you walk with me. You remember where we're going now?" Lenny looked startled, and then embarrassment hid his face against his knees. "I forgot again." "Jesus Christ," George said resignedly. "Well, look, we're gonna work on a ranch like the one we come from up north." "Up north?" "In Weed." "Oh, sure, I remember. In Weed. That ranch we're going to is right down there about the quarter mile. We're going to go in and see the boss. Now, look, I'll give him the work tickets, but you ain't going to say a word. You just stand there and don't say nothing. If he finds out what a crazy bastard you are, we won't get no job. But if he sees you work before he hears you talk, we're set. You got that? Sure, George. Sure, I got it. Okay, now when we go in to see the boss, what are you going to do? I, Lenny thought. His face grew tight with thought. I ain't going to say nothing. Just going to stand there. Good boy. That's swell. You say that over 2-3 times so you're sure you won't forget it. Then he droned to himself softly. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. I ain't gonna say nothing. Okay, said George. And you ain't gonna do no bad things like you done in weed, neither. Lenny looked puzzled. Like I done in weed? Oh, so you forgot that too, did you? Well, I ain't gonna remind you. I fear you'd do it again. A light of understanding broke on Lenny's face. They run us out of weed, he exploded triumphantly. Run us out? Hell, said George disgustedly. We run. They was looking for us, but they didn't catch us. Lenny giggled happily. I didn't forget that, you bet. George lay back on the sand and crossed his hands under his head, and Lenny imitated him, raising his head to see whether he were doing it right. God, you're a lot of trouble, said George. I could get along so easy and so nice if I didn't have you on my tail. I could live so easy and maybe have a girl. For a moment, Lenny lay quietly, and then he said hopefully, We gonna work on a ranch, George. All right, you got that. But we're gonna sleep here because I got a reason. The day was going fast now. Only the tops of the Gabilan Mountains flamed with the light of the sun that hid gone from the valley. A water snake slipped along the pool, its head held up like a little periscope. The reeds jerked slightly in the current. Far off towards the highway, a man shouted something, and another man shouted back. The sycamore limbs rustled under a little wind that died immediately. Okay, everyone, so just really quickly, we're going to read this passage called Three Types of Friendship. Okay, so Aristotle, an ancient Greek philosopher, thought that there were 3 types of friendship: those of pleasure, those of usefulness, and true friendship. So the first one, in friendships of pleasure, people find each other's company pleasant, but they may not respect each other's character. The second type, in the friendships of utility, utility meaning like usefulness, people find their friendships useful and gain an advantage from them. And lastly, in friendships of the good, friendship is based on mutual respect and admiration between people who have similar values and goals. So, Aristotle defined friendships of the good as true friendships. So, he defined this last group as true friendships, or friendships where we spend time with someone else not because we know it is worth it, but because the question of worth does not even arise. So, my question to you then is, which type of friendship do you think George and Lenny have? So out of the 3 types, which one do you think that they have? Why do you say this? Answer in at least 2 complete sentences. So 2 answers that I think you could possibly put. I think the most obvious one right now would be friendship of utility. Both of them need work, so they travel together so that they can find work, right? George is a little smaller, but he's really smart, whereas Lenny is really big, but he has an intellectual disability. So they kind of use each other's strengths to maybe find some work. The second option would be a friendship of the good. At this point, you can assume it's not friendship of pleasure because it really seems like George finds Lenny's presence kind of annoying at times. So George does not seem to enjoy Lenny's company, so the reader might assume that there is some other respect and connection between the men. So they might have some mutual respect and admiration for each other. When you need to listen to me, okay, you're going to have 2 questions that look like this. It's just going to pop up either a chart, it's going to be this picture, or a chart, okay? You can't just click it and type into it. It doesn't work, okay? So what you have to do is create a text box to type into that. So you do that, look at my mouse, by going down and clicking this capital T, lowercase t. Once you click that, ooh, wow, look at that, a text box appears. Okay, if you click this, you can move it to wherever you want it to be. If you click these, you can change it to whatever size you want it to be. Okay, so when you're filling it in, you're going to fill in just how you would do it if you were writing it in class. Okay, so I can literally put my text box right there, and I can fill in this information. Okay, I can type into this box. And if I want to make another one, all I got to do is click that again, and it will create, click that again, and it will create a new text box that I can now move over here, and I can type into this side. Okay, so that is how you do these. Do not email me and tell me you don't understand how to do this. Okay, click this box to make a new text box. You can move it around, add all the information you need to, and put it wherever you want to on the page.